The crystal champagne flute shattered in my hand the moment I heard Nate's sneering voice tell my girlfriend of 4 years that she deserved better than me at my own celebration gala. Blood and champagne dripped onto my custom tuxedo as I locked eyes with Savannah, searching for her defense of our relationship. Instead, her hesitation told me everything. What they didn't know was that the CEO they were underestimating had already gathered every text, receipt, and bank statement documenting their 4-year betrayal. While they thought I was building just a business empire, I'd also been building a case. People often mistake generosity for weakness. They assume that success makes you blind to deception. But loyalty isn't just a virtue I value, it's a contract. And contracts, when broken, have consequences. How would you respond when you discover the two people closest to you have been deceiving you for years while living off your generosity? The grand ballroom of the peninsula. Chicago glittered with success. 300 of the city's business elite had gathered to celebrate Sullivan Enterprises' acquisition of our largest competitor, a move that had taken me 5 years of meticulous planning and would double our market share overnight. I adjusted my cufflinks, simple platinum squares, a gift from Savannah on our 3rd anniversary, and watched her work the room. At 31, she commanded attention in her midnight blue gown, her business school poise evident in every conversation. My investment in her education was paying off. In 6 months, she'd graduate with her MBA, step into the executive internship I'd created for her, and our personal and professional lives would align perfectly. "You've outdone yourself, Mark," said Thomas Reynolds, slapping my shoulder. My longtime mentor and board member had been with me since I started the company with nothing but student loans and determination. "We're just getting started," I replied, accepting a fresh champagne flute from a passing server. "How's Savannah handling the spotlight?" Thomas asked, nodding toward her. "Born for it," I said, though I couldn't help noticing how Nate Wilson, my supposed best friend since college, hovered near her. I'd brought him into the company 5 years ago, another project of mine that hadn't quite yielded the expected returns. "To your success." Thomas raised his glass. Not bad for a kid from a trailer park in Indiana. I smiled, allowing myself a moment of pride. At 42, I'd achieved what most spend lifetimes chasing. The room brimmed with people who'd dismissed me once. Now they applauded. The chairman of the board tapped his microphone, calling for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to present the CEO who has increased shareholder value by 327% in 5 years, Mark Sullivan." Applause erupted as I made my way to the podium. The speech was brief, acknowledging the team and outlining the vision that had brought us here. As I thanked my final supporter, and to Savannah Mitchell, whose unwavering support made this possible, I caught her smile from her table. Returning to my seat afterward, I paused behind Savannah's chair, my hand resting lightly on her shoulder. That's when I heard it. "I don't know why you stay with him," Nate murmured, leaning close to her ear. "You deserve better than a workaholic who came from a trailer park." The room seemed to freeze. Several heads turned, conversations faltering as the words hung in the air. Savannah's spine stiffened beneath my hand, but she didn't immediately contradict him. I stepped forward, placing my champagne flute deliberately on the table. "Interesting perspective, Nate, especially coming from someone whose mortgage I helped pay last year." Nate straightened, his face flushing. "Mark, I heard exactly what you were just doing," I replied, my voice measured. The table had gone silent, colleagues suddenly fascinated by their desserts. Savannah finally found her voice. "He didn't mean anything by it, Mark. You know how Nate gets when he drinks." Her defense of him, rather than me, registered like a spreadsheet error, a small discrepancy that suggested a larger problem. After ensuring the celebration continued smoothly, I excused myself to my private office in the hotel's business center. The floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Chicago skyline I'd conquered, but my mind was elsewhere, reviewing years of small moments suddenly cast in new light. Savannah's unexplained absences when Nate was also unavailable. Her defensiveness when I questioned certain expenses. The way they sometimes exchanged glances at company functions. "Am I overreacting?" I asked the empty room, a habit from childhood when I'd work through problems aloud. A knock interrupted my thoughts. Thomas entered without waiting for a response, a privilege earned through years of mentorship. "I couldn't help noticing the tension," he said, closing the door. "Are you all right?" I loosened my tie, considering how much to share. "Did Nate's comment seem odd to you?" Thomas settled into a leather chair, his expression carefully neutral. "It's not the first time I've noticed him overstepping with Savannah." "What do you mean?" I asked sharply. He sighed. "Mark, you're brilliant with business strategy, but sometimes miss what's right in front of you. I've seen how they interact when you're occupied. The looks, the private conversations that stop when you approach." My chest tightened. "You think there's something between them?" "I think," Thomas said carefully, "that you should trust your instincts the way you do in business. You don't make accusations without evidence, but you don't ignore warning signs either." I nodded slowly, moving to the small safe hidden behind a landscape painting. From it, I removed a thin file folder. "What's that?" Thomas asked. "Insurance," I replied. "I started collecting it 3 months ago when things didn't add up. I was hoping I was wrong." The morning after the gala, I sat in my downtown office, the evidence folder open before me. What had started as a nagging suspicion had grown into a methodical investigation, a skill that had served me well in business acquisitions. The first document was a credit card statement. Savannah and I maintained separate finances, but I'd added her as an authorized user on one card for emergencies. The statement showed a pattern. Charges at hotels on days she claimed to be studying late at the library. Always the same hotels. Always on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Next came phone records. Hundreds of text messages to Nate, often late at night or when she was supposedly at study group. The content was inaccessible, but the timing told its own story. The third piece was more damning. Bank statements showing regular transfers from Savannah to Nate, always 2 days after I deposited money into her account for tuition or expenses. The amounts varied, but totaled over $50,000 in the past year alone. The investigator's report was most troubling. Photographs of Savannah and Nate entering a boutique hotel near her campus. Timestamps that contradicted her class schedule. Their easy physical familiarity suggesting a relationship far beyond friendship. But the final document made my blood run cold. A text message, screenshot from Savannah to Nate, that the investigator had obtained. "M just transferred the tuition money. I'll move your share tomorrow." He's clueless as always. I closed the folder, a cold clarity settling over me. This wasn't just an affair, it was calculated exploitation. And it had been happening for years. "You don't seem as surprised as I expected," I said to Thomas later that day over lunch at the Chicago club. He set down his fork with precision. "I wasn't certain, but I had suspicions. The way Nate's financial situation improved dramatically over the past few years, despite his mediocre performance reviews. How Savannah always defends him, even when he's clearly wrong." "Why didn't you say something sooner?" I asked, more curious than accusatory. Thomas sighed. "Would you have believed me without evidence, or would you have thought I was interfering in your personal life?" He was right. I would have dismissed it as misinterpretation. There's something else, Thomas added cautiously. At the Henderson conference last month, when you were giving the keynote— Go on, I prompted when he hesitated. I saw them in the hotel bar. The familiarity wasn't casual, Mark. And when Savannah saw me notice, she gave Nate this look, a warning. They were more careful after that. A server approached to refill our water glasses, and we fell silent until she left. The question is, Thomas continued, what are you going to do with this information? I studied the Manhattan skyline through the window. The same thing I do when I discover fraud in a company I'm acquiring. I gather all the facts, calculate the damage, and then implement consequences. This isn't business, Mark. It's personal, which is precisely why I need to approach it with more discipline, not less. That evening, I tested the waters. Savannah and I were having dinner in our penthouse apartment when I casually mentioned Nate's comment at the gala. I've been thinking about what Nate said, I began, watching her reaction carefully. It seemed unusually hostile. Savannah rolled her eyes, the picture of exasperation. He was drunk, Mark. You know how he gets. That's what people say when they want to excuse behavior, not explain it, I replied. Has he ever said anything like that before? When I'm not around? Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. What are you implying? I'm asking a straightforward question. She set down her fork with a sharp clink. You sound paranoid. Nate's been your friend for 20 years. He's just Nate. Sometimes he says stupid things. And you jump to his defense rather than mine, I observed. I found that interesting. Oh, for God's sake, she pushed back from the table. Are you seriously going to turn one drunken comment into some kind of interrogation? I didn't jump to his defense. I was trying to smooth over an awkward moment at your big event. I nodded, taking a sip of water. You're right. I'm being oversensitive. The ease with which she accepted this retreat confirmed what I needed to know. There was no concern about my suspicions, no effort to reassure me. Just irritation at being questioned. I have a study group tonight, she said, checking her watch. I should get going. I smiled. Of course. Good luck with the project. After she left, I called my driver. Follow Ms. Mitchell, please. Text me her destination. 20 minutes later, my phone chimed with a message. She's at the Langham Hotel, sir. It was Tuesday, right on schedule. The next evening was the company's post-acquisition celebration dinner, a smaller, more intimate gathering for key executives at Gibson's Steakhouse. Savannah sat beside me, occasionally touching my arm as she chatted with board members. Nate was 3 seats away, contributing little to the conversation, but drinking steadily. As dessert was served, the conversation turned to the company's future growth strategy. I outlined my vision while Savannah nodded appreciatively beside me. That's why we follow where Mark leads, Thomas said, raising his glass. He sees opportunities others miss. Nate snorted softly. The table quieted. Something to add, Nate? I asked pleasantly. He swirled his bourbon, emboldened by alcohol and an audience. Just thinking it must be nice to have everyone so impressed all the time. We're impressed by results, said Catherine, our CFO. Mark delivers them consistently. Sure, Nate nodded, his smile not reaching his eyes. Our humble leader from the trailer park. The American dream. He turned to Savannah. Don't you ever get tired of the rags to riches narrative? The constant work. The man keeps a spreadsheet of his daily activities, for God's sake. The table fell silent. Savannah laughed nervously. Nate, maybe switch to water? I'm just saying what everyone thinks, he continued, focusing on her. You're young, beautiful, sophisticated. You could be with anyone. Why settle for someone who treats relationships like a business acquisition? The silence deepened. All eyes shifted between us, the discomfort palpable. "Mark, I'm so sorry," Savannah whispered, squeezing my arm. "He's just drunk." I set down my napkin deliberately. "No, I'd like to hear more, Nate. Tell me exactly why Savannah should reconsider our 4-year relationship." In that moment, watching Nate's sneer and Savannah's discomfort, something crystallized within me. The hurt transformed into cold clarity. They had underestimated me, assumed I was either oblivious or too invested to act. A memory surfaced. My father standing in our trailer after learning of my mother's affair. "Never let them see you bleed, son. Pain is private. Consequences are public." I had built an empire from nothing, navigated boardroom battles and hostile takeovers. I had weathered economic downturns and industry disruptions, and these two thought I wouldn't notice their betrayal, wouldn't respond strategically. My silence stretched long enough to become uncomfortable. Savannah shifted beside me, her hand falling away from my arm. Nate's smirk began to falter. I thought of the evidence carefully compiled in my office safe. The investigators' photographs, the money transfers, the text messages. 4 years of deception while I paid Savannah's tuition, secured her internship, planned our future. This wasn't just about infidelity. This was about respect, about consequences, about demonstrating that loyalty wasn't optional in my world. It was foundational. The decision crystallized. No emotional outburst, no desperate pleas, just calculated, proportional consequences delivered with the same precision I applied to business. "An interesting perspective, Nate," I said finally, my voice conversational. "Especially coming from someone who's been sleeping with Savannah for the past 4 years while benefiting from my generosity." The table went completely still. Savannah's face drained of color. Nate's glass froze halfway to his mouth. "Mark, what are you talking about?" Savannah whispered, her voice strained. I turned to her, maintaining perfect composure. "The Langham Hotel, Tuesdays and Thursdays. The $50,000 you've transferred to Nate from the money I gave you for tuition. The text messages about how clueless I am." Her eyes widened in shock. "You've been spying on me?" "I've been verifying inconsistencies," I corrected, "as any responsible CEO would do when numbers don't add up." Nate recovered enough to attempt damage control. "Mark, you're making serious accusations based on—" "Facts," I interrupted. "Documented, verified facts. Would you like me to have copies of the hotel receipts sent to the table? Or perhaps the bank statements showing transfers from Savannah's account to yours 2 days after I deposit her tuition money?" His face flushed dark red. Around the table, executives stared at their plates, mortified witnesses to this unexpected revelation. Savannah grabbed my arm. "Mark, we need to discuss this privately." "Why?" I asked calmly. "The deception wasn't private. Why should the consequences be?" The dinner disintegrated shortly after my revelation. As executives made awkward excuses to leave, Savannah sat frozen beside me, her composure shattered. Nate had already fled, mumbling incoherent explanations. In the ensuing silence, I signaled for the check. "How long have you known?" Savannah finally asked, her voice barely audible. "I suspected for months. I confirmed it 3 weeks ago." I signed the bill, adding a generous tip for the server who had witnessed our drama. "Why didn't you say anything?" I met her eyes directly. "I was raised to verify before accusing and to plan before acting. Unlike some people, I don't make emotional decisions." She flinched. "Mark, it's not what you think. Nate and I, it started before you and I met." It was over years ago. I removed a single photograph from my jacket pocket, dated the previous Tuesday, and placed it before her. Lying compounds disrespect Savannah. Her eyes filled with tears as she stared at the image of herself and Nate entering the Langham. You hired someone to follow me? I protected my interests, I corrected. Something I've learned to do since growing up in that trailer park Nate so enjoys mocking. Thomas, the only executive who had remained, placed a supportive hand on my shoulder. I'll give you two some privacy, he said, rising. No need, I replied. We're finished here. Could you ensure Savannah gets home safely? I have some matters to attend to. Of course. Thomas nodded, understanding perfectly. As I stood to leave, Savannah grabbed my wrist. Mark, please. We need to talk about this. It was a mistake. A 4-year mistake that continued through yesterday is a choice, not an error, I replied, gently removing her hand. We'll discuss the practical details tomorrow. By 9 the next morning, I'd assembled my response team in the conference room. Elaine Chen, head of legal, David Miller, HR director, and Thomas, who served as both moral support and strategic advisor. I appreciate your discretion regarding last night's revelation, I began. This meeting isn't about personal grievances, but about protecting company interests that intersect with my personal situation. Elaine nodded professionally. Just to be clear about parameters, we're discussing Ms. Mitchell's internship and potentially Mr. Wilson's employment. Correct, I confirmed. Savannah's executive internship was contingent on her relationship with me, a personal arrangement. That relationship has ended. I need to understand our options for rescinding the offer without creating legal exposure. David consulted his tablet. The internship agreement specifies it's contingent on completing her MBA program. If she doesn't complete the degree, she won't, I said. I've been funding her education. That arrangement is also terminated. Thomas raised an eyebrow. She's in her final semester. Will she be able to complete it without your support? That's not my concern, I replied evenly. Regarding Nate's position, I want a complete performance review. If termination is warranted based on his work alone, prepare the documentation. Elaine made notes. We'll need to be careful about timing to avoid any appearance of retaliation. I understand. That's why we're having this meeting. I tapped my pen against the table. I also need to protect against potential reputation damage. If either of them attempts to spin this situation. We have the evidence you've collected, Thomas reminded me. Though using it publicly would be mutually assured destruction, reputation-wise. I nodded. It's deterrence, not first-strike capability. I won't use it unless provoked. For what it's worth, David said carefully, Nate's performance reviews have been mediocre at best. We've documented several instances of missed deadlines and subpar work product. Compile it all, I instructed. I want everything handled by the book. This isn't about revenge, it's about consequences. After the meeting, I retreated to my office to prepare for the inevitable confrontation with Savannah. She had called 12 times since last night. I had answered none. I opened my laptop and created a detailed transition plan. Financial separation. Revoke authorized user status on credit cards. Cancel automatic deposits to her tuition account. Contact University Financial Office regarding scholarship termination. Document all past financial support for potential legal challenges. Living arrangements. Secure temporary housing for myself. 4 seasons extended stay. Schedule removal of personal items from penthouse. Determine timeline for her to vacate. 30 days. Generous but final. Professional separation. Formalize internship rescission through proper channels. Ensure all communications go through. Legal. Prepare statement for necessary internal communications. Relationship closure. One final meeting to establish terms. No ongoing contact afterward. No negotiation on consequences. As I completed the list, my assistant buzzed through. "Sir, Mrs. Mitchell is here. She's quite insistent about seeing you." I checked my watch. Earlier than expected, but I was prepared. "And please show her in, Angela, and hold all calls." I closed the laptop and centered it precisely on my desk, a habit that helped me maintain control in turbulent situations. Then I stood, buttoned my suit jacket, and turned to face the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago River. The door opened. It was time for implementation. "You've been avoiding me," Savannah said as she entered, her voice a careful blend of hurt and indignation. I turned from the window, gesturing to the visitor's chair. "I've been preparing for this conversation. Please sit." She remained standing, arms crossed defensively. The confident business student had vanished, replaced by someone frantically calculating her next move. "Mark, what happened at dinner?" "Is not what we're here to discuss," I interrupted calmly. "The facts are established. I'm not interested in explanations or apologies. This meeting is about next steps." "Next steps?" she repeated, momentarily thrown by my businesslike approach. "Yes, the practical arrangements regarding our separation." I returned to my desk chair, maintaining the physical advantage of the space. "I've prepared a transition plan that's fair but final." "You can't just reduce 4 years to a transition plan," she protested. "On the contrary, 4 years of deception have reduced our relationship to exactly that." I opened a folder on my desk. "I'll continue paying the lease on the penthouse for 30 days, giving you time to make alternative arrangements. My things will be removed this afternoon." The clinical approach seemed to shock her more than anger would have. "Mark, please, can we just talk about this like normal people? I made a mistake. Multiple mistakes, repeatedly, over 4 years, including yesterday," I corrected. "Continuing with the arrangements. Your tuition payment for the final semester has been canceled. The executive internship position has been rescinded." Her face paled. "You can't do that. I'm 3 months from graduating." "I can and have. The funding was contingent on our relationship. That relationship has ended." "Because of one indiscretion?" she asked incredulously. I raised an eyebrow. "One 4-year indiscretion with my supposed best friend, funded in part by money I provided for your education. Let's maintain factual accuracy." Savannah's shock transformed into calculated distress. Tears welled in her eyes as she sank into the chair. "Mark, I know I hurt you. What I did was inexcusable. But throwing away 4 years, everything we've built together, over one mistake seems so extreme." I had anticipated this approach. The tears, the appeal to shared history, the minimization of betrayal, classic manipulation tactics that might have worked before I saw the truth. "This isn't an impulsive reaction," I explained evenly. "It's a considered response to a pattern of deception that undermines the foundation of trust our relationship was built on." "But people make mistakes," she persisted. "Relationships can recover from affairs. We could go to counseling." This wasn't an affair, Savannah. It was a systematic deception that included financial exploitation. I maintained steady eye contact. "You transferred money I gave you for education to Nate while mocking me in text messages. The breach isn't just emotional, it's a matter of fundamental respect." She switched tactics, anger replacing tears. "So that's it? You're just cutting me off completely? After everything I've done for you?" Everything you've done for me, I repeated slowly. That's an interesting perspective. Please elaborate on what exactly you believe you've done for me that outweighs 4 years of deception. She faltered, then rallied. I've been by your side at every company event. I've listened to your business problems. I've rearranged my schedule to accommodate yours. I've been the perfect partner. While simultaneously maintaining a relationship with Nate and using my financial support to fund it, I added. That doesn't meet my definition of a perfect partner. Savannah's expression hardened as she realized the manipulation wasn't working. She stood abruptly, switching to her final tactic. Ultimatum. You know what? Fine. If you can't even discuss this like an adult, if you're going to treat our relationship like some kind of business transaction, then maybe Nate was right about you all along. I remained seated, my expression unchanged. Is that your conclusion? Yes, she snapped. You have two choices, Mark. Either you apologize for humiliating me in front of your colleagues and we work through this together, or it's over. But if it's over, you're losing someone who truly cares about you over wounded pride. The audacity was almost impressive. After being caught in a 4-year deception, she was demanding my apology for exposing it. The entitlement revealed the true nature of her character more clearly than any evidence could. I stood slowly, rebuttoning my suit jacket. If those are my options, then our relationship is over, effective immediately. I don't negotiate with emotional blackmail, Savannah. Her confidence faltered. She had overplayed her hand, expecting me to fear losing her more than I valued my own dignity. You don't mean that, she said, uncertainty creeping into her voice. You're just angry. I'm not angry, I corrected her. I'm decisive. Anger is an emotion. This is a business decision about resource allocation. I'm simply withdrawing investment from a venture that's proven fundamentally unsound. A business decision. Is that all I am to you? No. Until yesterday, you were someone I trusted implicitly, someone whose future I was invested in building, someone I believed shared my values. I moved toward the door. Now you're a liability I'm choosing to eliminate from my portfolio. Her face crumpled as the reality set in. What am I supposed to do? I can't finish my degree without your support. The internship was my post-graduation plan. You're intelligent and resourceful, I replied, opening the door. I'm sure you'll figure something out. Perhaps Nate can help, since you found his support worth risking everything else for. The implementation of consequences proceeded with mechanical precision over the following days. Each step was executed through proper channels, documented meticulously, and communicated clearly, just as I would handle any business operation. The University Financial Office received formal notification that the Sullivan Entrepreneurship Scholarship would not be renewed for the final semester. Savannah's access to company systems was deactivated. HR sent the official rescission of the executive internship offer, citing changed circumstances rather than personal reasons. I moved temporarily to the Four Seasons, while my assistant coordinated the removal of my belongings from the penthouse. The lease payment for the following month was made as promised, providing Savannah the promised 30 days to relocate. Nate's situation resolved itself when he failed to appear for work 3 days in a row, effectively abandoning his position. HR processed it as a voluntary resignation. Through it all, I maintained my focus on the company's post-acquisition integration, throwing myself into work with renewed intensity. If colleagues whispered about the dramatic dinner revelation, they did so out of my earshot. You're handling this with remarkable composure, Thomas commented, during our weekly lunch. Most men would be falling apart. Composure is a choice, I replied, reviewing acquisition documents while we ate. Dignity isn't something others can take from you, only something you can surrender. Still, he persisted, on a personal level, this must be difficult. 4 years is a significant investment. I set down the documents and met his concerned gaze. The time wasn't wasted. I learned a valuable lesson about verification, about the importance of conducting due diligence in personal relationships as rigorously as in business ones. That sounds rather clinical, Thomas observed. Clinical is preferable to emotional when making decisions with long-term implications, I said. The emotional approach would have been to forgive, to hope for change, to ignore evidence. The clinical approach acknowledges reality and responds appropriately. And you're really done? No second thoughts? I considered the question seriously. Would you reinvest in a company that had systematically falsified its financial statements for 4 years? Thomas smiled sadly. People aren't companies, Mark. True, I acknowledged. Companies typically have better governance structures and accountability mechanisms. 3 weeks after our separation, the financial consequences began manifesting in Savannah's life. Unable to pay the final semester's tuition without my support, she had taken a leave of absence from the MBA program. Without the credential, the career opportunities she had been counting on evaporated. I learned this not from Savannah directly. We hadn't spoken since the day in my office, but from Catherine, our CFO, who had run into her working as a hostess at a downtown restaurant. She seemed different, Catherine reported uncomfortably, having mentioned it only because she thought I should know. Less confident. She asked me not to tell you, actually. Consider your social obligation fulfilled, I replied neutrally. Her current employment situation isn't my concern. But later that evening, alone in my newly purchased condominium overlooking Millennium Park, I allowed myself to reflect on the situation. Not with regret, but with analytical distance. Savannah had made calculated decisions. So had I. She had prioritized immediate gratification over integrity. I had prioritized dignity over emotion. We had both received the natural consequences of our choices. My phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. Need to talk. Important. It's Savannah. I considered blocking the number, then decided against it. Better to know what approaches she might attempt than to be caught off guard. A second text followed. Please, Mark, it's about Nate. I'm in trouble. This was predictable. When manipulation failed, try invoking urgency and fear. I set the phone aside without responding and returned to reviewing acquisition documents. An hour later, the doorman called up. Sir, there's a Ms. Mitchell here. She's quite insistent about seeing you. I closed my eyes briefly, considering options. Refusing to see her might only escalate her attempts at contact. Better to end this definitively. Send her up, Edward, but stay by the phone. I may need you to escort her out shortly. Savannah was a shadow of her former self when she stepped off the elevator into my foyer. The designer clothes had been replaced by simple jeans and a sweater. The confident posture had given way to hunched shoulders. Even her makeup was subdued, as if she'd calculated exactly how to appear vulnerable and struggling. Thank you for seeing me, she said, her voice small. I gestured to the living room, but remained standing. What's this urgent matter concerning Nate? She sank onto the edge of the sofa. After everything fell apart, I moved in with him. It seemed logical since we were both. She trailed off, perhaps realizing that reminding me of their relationship wasn't the best strategy. Go on, I prompted, unmoved. He had gambling debts, she continued. Serious ones. I didn't know until debt collectors started coming to the apartment. That's where all the money went, the money I gave him from. She swallowed hard. From what you gave me. I maintained silence, allowing her to continue digging. They're threatening him, and now me too, since I'm living there. He's disappeared, Mark. 3 days ago, he just vanished. Left a note saying he was sorry, and I should ask Mark for help because he's always been the responsible one. She pulled a crumpled paper from her purse, holding it out. I didn't take it. And what exactly are you asking for? I need $75,000 to pay off the most pressing debts, she said, the words rushing out. I know I have no right to ask. I know what we did was unforgivable. But I'm scared, Mark. These aren't nice people. I studied her for a long moment, seeing the calculation behind the fear. Do you know why I was able to build evidence of your affair with Nate so quickly? She blinked, thrown by the apparent non sequitur. What? It's an interesting business lesson, I continued conversationally. When you suspect fraud, the most efficient approach isn't to start from scratch. It's to create circumstances where the fraudulent behavior becomes clearly visible. Understanding dawned slowly on her face. What are you saying? I'm saying that I didn't just discover your affair, Savannah. I created the conditions to expose it. The extra tuition deposits, the emergencies that kept me working late on Tuesdays and Thursdays, the conveniently unlocked phone. Her expression shifted from confusion to horror as the implication sank in. You knew? All along, she whispered. Not all along, I clarified. I had suspicions for about 8 months. I confirmed them 3 months ago and then created a controlled environment to document the full extent. So, the scholarship increase last semester was to see if you would continue transferring funds to Nate, which you did, consistently, 2 days after each deposit. The late meetings on Tuesdays and Thursdays were scheduled specifically to give you the opportunity to meet him at your regular hotel. I maintained perfect composure. A CEO learns to test hypotheses before making decisions. She stared at me, tears streaming now. It was all a trap. No, I corrected her. It was due diligence. The decisions to betray my trust were entirely yours. I simply created conditions where those choices became undeniable. Why not just confront me when you first suspected? Because you would have denied it, minimized it, or promised it was over, and I would have had no way to verify the truth. I moved toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city lights. In business, I've learned that character is revealed under pressure, not during comfort. I needed to see who you really were when you thought I wasn't looking. Savannah's shoulders slumped in defeat. So there's no help coming. The consequences you're experiencing now are the direct result of choices you and Nate made, I said evenly. Choices to exploit my support, to deceive me, and in Nate's case, to develop a gambling addiction. Why would I intervene in that natural process? Because despite everything, I thought you loved me once, she whispered. I did, I acknowledged, the first hint of emotion entering my voice. That's why the betrayal warranted such a thorough response. Love without respect is meaningless, Savannah. You and Nate taught me that valuable lesson. She stood shakily. So that's it. You let me hit rock bottom to prove a point? No. I stepped away and allowed natural consequences to unfold. There's a difference. I moved toward the foyer, signaling the conversation's end. As for your current situation, I suggest speaking with the police about the threats. Gambling debts aren't legally enforceable, and threats of violence are criminal matters. At the elevator, she turned back, a shadow of her former confidence flickering across her face. You know what's ironic? You're more like Nate than you realize. Just as calculating, just as cruel. I held her gaze steadily. There's a fundamental difference. I calculate consequences. Nate calculated exploitation. I was cruel in response to betrayal. He was cruel despite loyalty. And most importantly, I pressed the elevator button for her. I can sleep at night knowing my word means something. The doors closed on her tear-streaked face, and with it, the last connection to the relationship that had dominated 4 years of my life. 6 months after the final confrontation with Savannah, I delivered our quarterly results to the assembled shareholders. Standing at the podium in our downtown headquarters, I announced record-breaking profits and an acquisition that had exceeded projections by 12%. Success in business, as in life, depends on understanding who you're really dealing with, I concluded, making deliberate eye contact with key investors. When you know someone's true character, you can make decisions with absolute confidence. As the crowd dispersed, Thomas approached, his expression a mixture of professional satisfaction and personal concern. Another masterful presentation, he said, helping me gather my materials. But I'm more interested in how you're doing personally. It's been half a year since everything happened. You can speak directly, Thomas, I replied with a slight smile. Half a year since I discovered my girlfriend and supposed best friend were conspiring behind my back while living off my generosity. I've made peace with it. We walked toward the executive lounge, exchanging nods with board members along the way. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the Chicago skyline, a vista I had earned through methodical decision-making in both business and personal matters. I heard Savannah dropped out permanently, Thomas said, lowering his voice as we settled into leather chairs. And apparently Nate surfaced in Vegas, working as a poker dealer. Fitting career choices for both, I observed without rancor. She always excelled at presenting an appealing facade, and he preferred games of chance to actual work. Thomas studied me with the practiced eye of a mentor who had known me for 20 years. You know, Mark, it would be entirely normal to feel something about their downfall. Satisfaction, vindication, even grief for what might have been. I considered his words, watching a commercial airliner trace its path across the clear autumn sky. I felt all those things initially, I admitted, but dwelling on emotional responses doesn't serve any purpose. They made choices, I made mine. The outcomes were predictable. That's rather clinical, he noted, echoing his comment from months earlier. Perhaps, I acknowledged, but there's a certain peace in accepting reality without emotional distortion. I found I prefer it. And personally, are you dating again? I smiled at his awkward phrasing. I'm approaching relationships with better risk assessment protocols. Thomas laughed, despite himself. Only you could make dating sound like a merger evaluation. The principles are surprisingly similar, I replied. Past performance, transparency, aligned values, mutual benefit. Isn't that what we all want in both business and personal relationships? His expression sobered. Just don't let one betrayal, however significant, close you off to genuine connection. That would give them more power than they deserve. I nodded, recognizing the wisdom in his concern. I haven't given them that power. I've simply upgraded my verification systems. That evening, I led a mentoring session with promising junior executives, a program I'd implemented after the acquisition. What had begun as a discussion of decision-making under pressure had evolved into a conversation about deeper principles of leadership and judgment. Success isn't just about strategy, I told them, leaning against my desk as they sat in a semicircle before me. It's about recognizing patterns, both in markets and in people. How do you know which patterns matter? Asked Melissa, a sharp young analyst from operations. By testing hypotheses rather than making assumptions, I explained. We often see what we want to see, in data, in opportunities, in people. True clarity comes from verification. That sounds time-consuming, noted James from finance, checking his watch unconsciously. So is recovering from catastrophic misjudgments, I countered. I've developed what I call a loyalty contract approach to both business and personal relationships. The group leaned forward with interest, sensing the rare personal insight from their normally reserved CEO. A loyalty contract isn't written, I continued. It's demonstrated through consistent actions over time. When you find people, whether business partners or personal relationships, who honor that unwritten contract, you've found something worth investing in. And when they don't? Asked Melissa. Then you implement proportional consequences and redirect your resources to more promising investments, I said simply. Loyalty isn't an emotional luxury, it's a practical necessity in any sustainable relationship. Their expressions reflected varying degrees of understanding. Some nodded immediately, recognizing the wisdom from their own experiences. Others looked thoughtful, perhaps struggling with the application to their personal lives. Is that why Sullivan Enterprises has such low executive turnover? James asked. Because you reward loyalty? I reward demonstrated integrity, I clarified, which often looks like loyalty, but is actually something deeper, a fundamental alignment between words and actions. After the session ended and the young executives filed out, Thomas remained behind, perched on the edge of a conference table. That was quite philosophical for a business mentoring session, he observed. I shrugged, organizing my notes. The principles apply universally. I've simply become more deliberate about articulating them and living by them, he added. You know, watching how you handled the Savannah situation taught me something, too. Oh? That dignity isn't what others grant you. It's what you refuse to surrender, even when it would be easier to compromise. I nodded, appreciating his insight. The easier path is rarely the one with lasting value. Just remember, he said, heading for the door, there's a difference between wisdom and walls. One protects you while allowing connection, the other isolates completely. I'll keep that in mind, I promised, knowing he was right. 1 year to the day after the gala, where everything began to unravel, I stood on the balcony of my Millennium Park condominium. The city lights flickered to life as dusk settled over Chicago. The skyline, a testament to human ambition, determination, and resilience. My phone chimed with a news alert from the business school Savannah had attended, featuring a story about their record graduation rate. The irony wasn't lost on me. She would have been among those graduates had she made different choices. I sipped my bourbon, reflecting on the year's transformations. The company had completed another successful acquisition. I had started dating again, carefully, selectively, with clear eyes about human nature and its capacity for both loyalty and betrayal. The experience had changed me, undeniably. I was more methodical now about personal relationships, applying the same strategic thinking that had built my business empire. Some might call it cynical. I considered it realistic, an evolution rather than a diminishment. 2 weeks earlier, I had encountered Savannah unexpectedly. She was hosting at an upscale restaurant where I was dining with potential investors. Our eyes had met briefly across the crowded room, hers widening in recognition, mine acknowledging her presence without emotion. She looked thinner, more subdued, her designer clothes replaced by the restaurant's standard uniform. I had felt no satisfaction in her reduced circumstances, no vindictive pleasure in the visible evidence of consequences, just a calm certainty that the natural order had reasserted itself, that actions eventually reveal character, and character ultimately determines destiny. Thomas had asked recently if I ever regretted the calculated way I'd handled the betrayal. Wouldn't it have been simpler to just confront them immediately? He'd wondered. Perhaps, but simplicity and clarity aren't the same thing. By creating conditions that revealed their true characters beyond any possibility of denial or minimization, I'd given myself the gift of absolute certainty. There was no room for second-guessing, no nagging what-ifs to disturb my peace. I'd also discovered something unexpected. Strength isn't about never being betrayed. It's about what you do afterward, how you respond. Whether you allow others' actions to diminish your sense of self-worth or use them as clarifying experiences that refine your judgment. Leaning against the balcony railing, I surveyed the city that had been both backdrop and witness to my personal and professional journey. I had built an empire from nothing once. I had rebuilt my personal life from betrayal. Both experiences had required the same fundamental qualities: clear vision, strategic thinking, and unwavering commitment to my own values. A text message lit up my phone. From Catherine, a corporate attorney I'd been seeing casually for the past 2 months. Intelligent, direct, with her own successful career, she approached relationships with the same clear-eyed pragmatism I had come to value. No pretense, no hidden agendas, just straightforward communication and mutual respect. I typed a response, confirming our dinner plans, then turned back to the glittering skyline. The past was instructive, but not defining. The future held promise for those who approached it with wisdom earned through experience, and the courage to invest again, wisely, when the right opportunity presented itself. Trust is valuable precisely because it can be broken. Its real worth lies not in blind faith, but in the courage to verify what deserves our confidence and to act decisively when that confidence is betrayed. Mark's journey from successful CEO to betrayed partner to wiser man demonstrates a universal truth. Dignity isn't something others can take from you. It's something you surrender when you accept disrespect as your due. Many of us have experienced betrayal by those closest to us. The shock of discovering that someone we trusted implicitly had been leading a double life at our expense. The hurt can be paralyzing, the humiliation overwhelming. We question not just the relationship, but our own judgment. How could we have been so blind? What signs did we miss? Were we fools to trust at all? In these painful moments, we have choices that define our future relationships more profoundly than the betrayal itself. We can retreat into cynicism, building walls so high that no one can hurt us again, but no one can truly connect with us either. We can swing to the opposite extreme, desperately clinging to broken relationships out of fear that demanding better means ending up alone. Or we can find the balanced middle path that Mark eventually discovered: trust with verification, generosity with boundaries, openness with discernment. The loyalty contract philosophy offers a framework for approaching relationships with both heart and head engaged. Trust, but verify. Invest, but monitor. Forgive mistakes, but recognize patterns. These aren't contradictions. They're the balanced approach of someone who values both connection and self-respect. Financial support in relationships creates unique vulnerabilities, revealing character on both sides of the equation. The giver's generosity can become enabling. The receiver's gratitude can transform into entitlement. Power imbalances distort perception, making it difficult to distinguish genuine care from calculated advantage. True relationship strength comes from mutual respect, regardless of resource disparities. A lesson Mark learned at significant personal cost. Perhaps most importantly, Mark's story reminds us that consequences aren't punishment. They're the natural outcome of choices made. When we shield others from the results of their actions out of misplaced compassion or fear of conflict, we deny them the opportunity to grow through accountability. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do, for ourselves and others, is to step back and allow natural consequences to unfold. Moving forward with wisdom rather than cynicism requires acknowledging the pain of betrayal without letting it define your capacity for future trust. The scars of deception can become either barriers or teachers, depending on how we integrate the experience. Each new relationship becomes an opportunity to apply hard-earned discernment, not to wall yourself off from connection, but to invest more strategically in those who demonstrate integrity through consistent actions. We all deserve relationships built on mutual respect and loyalty. Our boundaries aren't selfish demands. They're the necessary foundation for authentic connection. When we compromise our dignity to maintain relationships, we don't preserve love. We merely postpone its inevitable collapse under the weight of accumulated disrespect. Mark's methodical approach to betrayal might seem coldly strategic to some, but it represents a profound form of self-respect. By refusing to accept deception, by establishing clear consequences, by valuing demonstrated character over empty promises, he reclaimed not just his dignity, but his ability to trust wisely in the future. The question isn't whether we'll face betrayal in our lives, it's how we'll emerge from it. Will we become bitter or better, closed or cautious, victims of our past or architects of our future? The choice, as Mark discovered, is entirely our own.